Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from viewers from Singapore and from viewers from North America. Good evening. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from viewers. My name is Dr Liew Kai Khiun, and I'm an independent cultural researcher, and it gives me a great honor to be moderating this book discussion today on Steve Ferzacca, Sonic City, Making Rock Music and Urban Life in Singapore. This is a book that it actually touches my heart very deeply for a person who has grown up in Singapore and whose music formations were actually taking place in the shopping center, Peninsula Plaza, in which a lot of the stories and accounts of stray dogs took place. But today we are joined with two other moderators aside from the author, Steve, Dr. Adil Johan and Professor Jane Jacobs. So who would have comments to share in this book discussion. So without further ado, I will move first to Professor Jane for her comments, and we'll go to Adil subsequently before ending with the author, Steve, for his comments, and we will open the floor for further discussions. So thank you very much, and I leave the floor to Jane next.
Great. Hi there, everybody, and thank you very much, KK, for that lovely introduction. I'd also like to just thank Oksana for organising this event so thoroughly. Let me begin by just really congratulating Steve Ferzacca on this wonderful contribution to Singaporean and Southeast Asian studies, to cultural studies of popular music, to the studies of cultural life of cities, and to what I think he calls in the book vernacular history, because this is a book that is part history, part present. I'd also like to acknowledge actually that Steve, while he was researching and writing the book, made an enormous contribution to Singapore intellectual and cultural life. Many of us hadn't been to a gig in a lot of years, and we really appreciated getting the invitations to the gigs. First of all, Steve was at the National University of Singapore Asia Research Institute under the encouragement of Chua Beng Wat and Mike Douglas and Tim Burnell. And then he came to our institution, Yale-NUS College, to head up anthropology in an interim arrangement. So he was a really wonderful colleague to have across the time of the production of the book. And also, I just would like to acknowledge and thank NUS Press for publishing this book. It really offers new knowledge, new insights and novel documentation of what I think is a significant, if small, thread of urban life in Singapore. Sonic City is at face value a book about making blues music in Singapore, which I love the various terms that Steve uses to talk about them. Some are low popular registers such as noise, and more esoteric academic registers such as acoustomology, meaning a way of knowing the world through sound. As geographer Jamie Gillan, who wrote the foreword to the book, suggests, we should listen to Sonic City rather than read Sonic City. And the things we listen to when we read it are stories that are told about a band forming, about how music tastes were birthed, if you like, the lyrics and how they're written and what they have to say. And we hear a lot about the atmospheres of music making and music sharing in Singapore. Sonic City is for me very distinctive because it offers a set of up-close stories and gentle theorizations about a small group of blues musicians, Blues 77, and the linked band, the Stray Dogs, of which Steve became a part as an anthropologist and guitarist and somewhat singer, he would even himself admit. This then is a book about his and their journey, his and their memories, his and their communities of affiliation, his and their aspirations, his and their ongoing musicking, as he calls it in the book. And there are three things for me. I'm a geographer and an urban studies scholar. There are three things that really struck me about the book. One is the attentiveness to what I call scale, but Steve might call it something else. The attentiveness to locality, and this moral imagination in the book around deep sound and moral economy. And I want to just talk about those three things quickly. With respect to scale, this is a book that has a great deal to tell us about the shifting scales of identity and sociality of this particular sonic community. The phrase that captures this most clearly in the book is the phrase called cosmopolitan conviviality, and I think Adil will talk about this as well. Blues 77, the band, their predecessor group, the Stray Dogs, and their followers and families are pretty small in number. If you like, they're a subcultural formation of sorts, tied by interest in a specific genre of music, a genre that's not to everybody's taste. But this music genre has a wide and long global history and present, which serves as the medium for openings that transcend small affiliations of family, neighborhood, race, and nation, including letting Steve into the community to produce the book we're gathered here today to celebrate. You know, it's almost a cliche to talk about music as this ability to cross boundaries, but here we have an extremely precise example of that. And this book offers then a captivating account of the shuttling, what I call the shuttling of actually existing cosmopolitanism between located lives, deeply located lives, and global flows of musical genres, of an academic traveling through what Steve calls sonic scales. And I really love that attentiveness to that. There are no essentialisms in that rendering of cosmopolitanism versus being located. One facilitates and accommodates the other. Let's talk then about locality, which kind of could be thought about as place, but I think Steve has got a slightly more clever understanding of locality. As a geographer, I see Steve's thinking about locality as a major contribution. It documents how cosmopolitanism takes shape in and through locality. And I felt this was far more than what Doreen Massey did when, I think in the 90s, she bequeathed the phrase a global sense of place. Or at least I think Steve starts to extend that idea in really important ways. How does he do that? How does he extend that idea? Sonic Cities offers us a wonderful map of the located articulations of cosmopolitan music subculture in Singapore. The group Blues 77 is a locality in itself, as is this masculine activity of talking cock, but we also hear about locality as a place. The role of the crossroads of the guitar shops of Peninsula Shopping Centre, including Lim Kiang's Guitar 77, where regulars went to jam and drink. We hear about Jago Close and the Tree in the ethnically fluid Katong neighbourhood where Kiang and others grew up, out of which came the Stray Dogs, and they formed their musical affiliations. We hear about posh venues in Orchard Road and current street cred venues, albeit now located in malls such as Hood. We hear about hidden away jam studios, including the converted storeroom known as the Doghouse and its totem white Fender Stratocaster guitar. We hear about airports, hotels, and overseas gigs. These are not just contexts in this book. They are what Steve calls part of the vernacular milieu, always intersections of action, place, and time, so that when Blues 77, and I love this idea, Steve, when Blues 77 perform Blues Now in a mall venue in Singapore called Hood, they are also performing the blues and the band and the boys that formed in Katong back in the days. Finally, I want to talk about deep sound and moral economy. One aspect of the thesis of this book I found completely refreshing was the concept of deep sound. At one point, Steve refers to this as soundings from the fathoms of social life. I was really struck by the theoretical courage shown in the rendering of this deep sound world. It is revealed to be one of enduring reciprocal exchanges in and through performing blues music and all that attaches to that. What I think with respect to this is better demonstrated by the interpretive paths not taken by Steve. Steve does not succumb to the temptation of placing these people into identities not of their own making, to the readings that might have been imported from studies of music subcultural formations elsewhere. These are not musicians merely mimicking Western music tastes. These are not musicians or Singapore citizens with subjectivities fully disciplined by state constructs. They're not a group locked into a narrative of subcultural resistance. Instead of such interpretive violations, we encounter notions such as a moral economy of sonic obligation and exchanges, a performativity of mistakes, that's a direct quote, which evokes this idea of tolerance, of making a mistake in a performance through to forgiving someone for their background, for being a posh academic, for being white, for being someone who didn't fit the box of meritocratic pathways of development as a young adult. This performativity of mistakes becomes a term of endearment, the terms for endearment. And finally, vernacular heritage. And the heritage chapter was a great read for me as someone who's written about heritage and has taught on heritage. Here we have in the concept of vernacular heritage that Steve evokes is, for example, the performances by the stray dogs that are brought in by the state in some, moment of rediscovery and nostalgia. And yet we see how the stray dogs manage to retain and even amp up the blues selfhood that they bring with them by even though they're belatedly incorporated into state-sanctioned heritage nostalgia events. That is, these are people who are their own people, for whom musicking and being part of Blues 77 or part of Stray Dogs gives them an unassailable identity, an identity that they can adjust to various circumstances. Sonic City is, as Jamie Gillan noted in the foreword, a book that oozes heart. I'm not sure if I should mount my questions now, but I have a couple of questions, but I just want to congratulate you again, Steve, on the book. I'm not quite sure if I'm supposed to go to my questions at the moment, but I'll flag them just while I'm here on screen. It was this heartfeltness, Steve, that I felt was the most unlikely thing of the book, and the most unlikely thing today in academic books of popular music phenomena. I'd like Steve to reflect in the moment when we go into dialogue on how this emotional attunement was different to other ethnographic experiences that he's had in the past. Does he think that this attunement was about the convergence around blues music in itself, something about the coordination that happens when you make music and the sort of emotional excesses of that? Or were there also other vectors of convergence? And, most notably, the one is, a generational convergence, same age and same gender, of the same time, if you like. So that's one question. Second question is much more theoretical, and it's about Latour, and you use the work of Bruno Latour lightly but frequently in the book. And of course, his ideas of heterogeneous associations can help us make sense of any part of our world. What I wondered was whether you felt there were things that openness that Latour allows us doesn't bring to the analysis? Do we miss politics? Do we miss non-materialized emotional investments such as fandom, affinity, and tolerance, which, if you like, sit somewhere else theoretically, or might sit somewhere else theoretically? So I'm sort of interested in whether you felt there were limits to Latour. Finally, I was left with a real burning curiosity about fans. What does this all mean for them? Who were they? And what extra work, what next phase of work could you or your successor in this kind of work in Singapore do around fandoms in Singapore? Thank you very much, Steve, and congratulations.
Thank you, Jane, for this really beautiful, heartful commentary. And so just again, Professor Jane Jacobs is from the Yale-NUS Head of Studies of Urban Studies group. And I just want to add on before going to Adil's portion that I'm thankful that Jane has mentioned about the word talking cock, which is not just readily understood by the rest of the world. It's a very localized expression. It's probably called either banter in Steve's writings. Why do I know it that intimately? Because I tried to put this word in the book review, and the editor wasn't that pleased about it. You know. But I mean, it does actually recognize the kind of deep sounds and the rawness of the vernacular sounds in Blues 77 and Sonic City. So without further ado, we'll go to Dr. Adil Johan, the next speaker. And Adil is also a great researcher in the music scene in not just Singapore and Malaysia, but in Southeast Asia as well. So Adil, rock and roll.
My apologies. Good good afternoon, everyone from Malaysia. As Dr. Liew Kai Khiun said, I'm Dr. Adil Johan. On behalf of the Institute of Ethnic Studies, KITA, we're very thankful and happy to be collaborating with NUS Press to be a part of a presentation of this wonderful new book, Sonic City, okay, by Steve Ferzacca. Also, thank you very much, Professor Jane Jacobs, for that wonderful, as Kai Khiun said, beautiful, and I also feel very lucid and incisive and sensitive summary of the book, and also of the social theoretical implications, right, that are brought about by Steve's. It's definitely a landmark study, you know. I will be speaking and commenting from the perspective of an ethnomusicologist, a researcher of popular music, and also as a researcher of the Malay world and Southeast Asia. And I want to add also to Professor Jacobs' reminder to us about this book's emphasis on the obligatory listening, right, to Sonic City. But I wanted to add, of course, aside from that obligatory listening of the book, of the contents of the book, there's also a need to be very much involved in that experience, right, of that was brought out by Steve in the book Sonic City. And I'll elaborate a little bit also, I mean, from my own personal experiences, from being in Singapore and encountering very similar experiences that Dr. Ferzacca has outlined, right, in the book, and that he has detailed very intimately. So when you go to Singapore, I'm also commenting, as I forgot to mention, I'm also commenting as a musician myself, and there were a lot of there were a lot of observations and experiences that were documented in Steve Ferzacca's book that I can actually confirm, and I hope that this is also a motivator for all of you out there to pick up the book and read it. This book methodologically sees Steve enter the Singaporean popular music scene, well, the underground popular music scene, as a participant performer. You know, of course, in anthropology, we think about the term participant observer, right? But Steve is going in as somebody who is not only observing, but he's also performing with his so-called subjects. And I don't want to use the term subjects or informants here. I mean, these are not Steve's subjects or informants, they're his friends, right? I think that's a very important part. There's a very important intimate aspect to the interactions that Steve has gone through in presenting us this very rich ethnography of Singapore. So Steve goes into the Peninsula Shopping Mall of Singapore, which is also a mall which happens to have a very large Myanmarese population. There are a lot of businesses that are catered to the migrant worker Myanmarese population in Singapore. But it also happens to be a mall that contains one of the highest amount of music instrument shops. And I can attest to that because sometime in 2008, I actually traveled to Singapore from Malaysia with my guitarist friend Wan Gigi, and he came specifically to Peninsula Mall to buy a guitar, and he's a professional guitarist. Later on, when I was doing my research, my own research that was based in Singapore, a friend of mine brought me to Peninsula Mall to visit a hi-fi shop to check out speakers and all record players. And the experiences of actually the after hours experiences that Steve outlines, whereby people actually go there and they perform and they hang out, and of course for a lot of the Singaporeans there, they partake in drinking alcohol and consuming snacks and things like that in a very, as Professor Jacobs highlighted, in a very convivial, cosmopolitan manner. So those experiences are very real, and those are experiences that I have experienced myself. Going to the mall, and I've also had jam sessions in back rooms of shops in the mall itself, and I was really struck when I read this book at how I think this is perhaps the first time that experiences such as this, or what I would say are subaltern ethnography, a subaltern ethnographic experiences of the social practices of Singaporeans are captured so vividly and so intimately in Steve's book. And of course, I mean, I could say a bit about Steve's deployment of Latour's theory about the agency of objects and assemblages, or the reassemblies of such objects, whereby the guitar is very much at the center of these social articulations, right? And of course, the guitar, or playing guitar with his friend Lim Kiang, the bassist from Stray Dogs, right? Was what actually got the connection going between Steve and his friends, right? And of course, aside from that, we have to talk about the space of the mall. And in Singapore, the shopping mall is a very important social and cultural space. However, the mall that Steve uncovers is one that is not seen or is not portrayed as the official vision or experience of a Singaporean mall. We're talking about after hours gatherings. We're talking about the mall as actually a place for community and communitas, where people actually gather around these assemblages, right, of objects, or or things like music, like their joint appreciation for certain types of music, and of course from different eras of music that they were tied to. And these subaltern spaces in which these uncommon or unofficial Singaporeans are hanging out and making music and, hanging out and being friends. These are places that, are, of course, they're not recognized by the state officially, right? But they are very much a part of the, well, they're very much a part of the soul of Singapore that we never see in official discourses. We can also talk about the kind of the sonic aspects, the acoustomologies of the spaces that Steve explores in this book. And I mean, of course, it is true. I mean, you hear the reverberations of people practicing guitars or trying out guitars at high volume. And that is definitely an acoustomological experience that one will also get when one traverses in these spaces. But I guess the thing that I would like to take away from the book is and actually, of course, moving forward, right, in research, is as a scholar of music in Southeast Asia, I think Steve provided a very useful methodology and framework for how to do scholarship, at least anthropological, ethnographic scholarship, as a performing and musicking musician. And I mean, I think that's something that's very evident in his book, is this idea of Christopher Small's musicking, where music is more than just the product of the work or the music, but it's also about the social, the constellation of social practices that converge around music, whether it is fandom, or whether it is the cultural codes of going to a concert or attending a jam session or performance. I think Steve captures that very well through his very rich subaltern ethnography. So thereby, I mean, for me, my main takeaway from the book, that it is a brilliant intersection between scholarship or anthropological scholarship and participatory research, performing and performativity, and of course musicking. So of course I would completely focus in on music, and I know that you're hearing a lot of talking heads today. We're actually going to hear some music later as well. I've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to end with a choice quote. I don't know, maybe somebody, Upasana, who we're very thankful to have, could display the quote that I wanted to highlight from the book, and I hope that this will entice you also to dig in, and get a copy. So local Singaporean musicians and bands made this cosmopolitan music on their own. And Steve is talking about the music of the Singaporean bands that he was interacting with. And one of the main bands, of course, is the Stray Dogs, which is Lim Kiang band. And of course, they then formed their own band, Blue 77. So local Singaporean musicians and bands made this cosmopolitan music their own, domesticating it for both non-local and local audiences that reflected the kind of mimetic alterity that was and continues to be something more than mere imitation. I think this is a wonderful circumlocation of the paradoxes of popular music making in the Malay world, in Southeast Asia, and especially in that historical period that Steve is trying to capture in retrospect, the 1960s and 1970s. Actually, that's my own timer. Excuse me. And just to end, I think this will be a very important aspect that will be elaborated on, as we take Steve's research further out of this book. In that, of course, when you listen, if you're an outsider listening to Singaporean and Malaysian and Malayan popular music from that era, you're going to hear mimicry. But actually, there's a lot more distinction in what was happening, and it wasn't just imitation. And then this is something that I think popular music scholars and music scholars will be elaborating on moving forward from this book, and also in already existing work. And I just want to also end with two questions for Steve, and I'll try to keep them very brief. I know I've gone over my 10 minutes. So I wanted Steve to comment a little bit. I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about ethnicity and race, right? Coming from the Institute of Ethnic Studies. So I wanted Steve to maybe comment a little bit on the issue of ethnicity and race and the politics of Singapore being, surrounded in this precarious position, surrounded by the Malay world. They're surrounded by Malaysia, of course, and Indonesia. And the question I have is, as the music of your bandmates were extremely influential in the entire region, I wanted to know, or maybe you could share some insights on how did they themselves, who were mainly non-Malays, how did they situate themselves culturally in the Malay world? And namely in relation to Malaysia and Indonesia, there's accounts of them traveling in Bangkok. There's some mention of them touring and performing in Kuala Lumpur and other places, but it doesn't get. I mean, there's not much exploration into the relationship between Singapore and Malaysia as much. But so yeah, my question is what connections or ruptures are present in their social cultural location, your bandmates, in the fluid musical history of the region? And of course, I know you have covered this, but I'd love for you to elaborate more in this session. And something a little bit more personal. My last question is, breaking up a band is hard to do, and that's kind of like what happened with you and Blue 77 at the end of the book. It's actually very heartbreaking to read about. And of course, you've left Singapore and you're now in Canada, right? What is your relationship like with your friends and bandmates from Blue 77 today? And what are the kind of challenges of sustaining relationships far removed across continents, yet so intimately connected musically? And I'll end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adil, once again for this very insightful commentary, very personalized perspectives put into the topic. And we cannot talk about Adil Johan. Just want to give a shout out for you, Adil, for your latest Made in Nusantara Studies in Popular book that you were co-editor with Meko Santala. And of course, since this is an NUS Press event, how can we not talk about your earlier book, Cosmopolitan Intimacies, which I'll just share very briefly, this one. Yeah, and it's still available. So this is a book that actually made us listen to Malay films as much as reading it. So it's what Timothy Bernard has said, the best book of Malay films ever. So maybe before we move to Steve for his responses, maybe we can play a little bit of a clip on his performances. This is where... All right, now we go over to the man himself, Steve.
Hello. Well, that was the very first performance we ever did of that song in the old hood. It wasn't quite up to snuff, but anyway, is that me feeding back? Hold on a second. Well, thank you very much to everyone for this event. First, I want to thank Peter Schopert and NUS Press for publishing the book. I want to thank Pallavi Narayan for fielding the manuscript back when I submitted it. And of course, I want to big shout out and thanks to Sana at the press for organizing this event and helping me manage the book after publication. Finally, I want to thank the panelists for agreeing to participate, and thanks to all of you in attendance for being here today. Well, I'm kind of speechless, actually. If I go with what I've heard here, then some of the things I was hoping would happen with the book have happened. But we have before us three panelists who are extremely astute and and able to find all of the stories I was trying to tell and locate them in a kind of a scholarly conversation that means maybe it worked a bit. So I appreciate those comments, and I want to respond to them. Just quickly before I do, what I heard are across the three panelists, each of them identified one of the things that I hope would happen with this book. One of them was a description and a lived experience, as much as one can put such things in writing and sound, of the cosmopolitan conviviality that energizes this small community. This gives me a chance to respond to Jane's question about politics. I guess, yes, Latour is criticized in his methodological approach that if everything is emergent, phenomenological, and all you're doing is tracing the associations among human and non-human forces, that where you're likely going to miss the politics and power involved. I suppose what struck me was the cosmopolitanism of this small community was politics in and of itself. Singapore, is a colonial city, and as Frantz Fanon said, these are very divided places. And Singapore still has strong remnants of an old-fashioned idea, the plural society, where different ethnic groups are slotted into kind of different occupations and livelihoods and paths forward. And certainly that exists in Singapore. And I guess when I met this group of people, I was ready for the sociological dramatizations of racial harmony and tension that I have always read about. And so I was struck by the heterogeneity of the group, the heterogeneity of ideas and people and things all coming together, as you noted, Jane, through a set of reciprocal exchanges and relations. So the cosmopolitanism was a kind of politics to me, and I was hearing, hey, we can live another way here if we want to. So that was one thing, and the cosmopolitanism that was so deeply grounded in reciprocal exchanges. So if someone goes out of Singapore and comes back, maybe went to Malaysia or Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam or whatever, if you flew, you had to stop in and make sure you got the cheap whiskey that you could get as you passed through the airport and bring it to the group. So it was always expected. There were so many of these kinds of things. They're described in the book. And I also saw that as a kind of politics, and especially as it was taking place in the basement of a mall, temples of capitalistic exchange, and here in the middle of all that, even in the middle of a retail guitar shop where everything is for sale, and all you should be doing in a mall really is shopping. Were these community events, at the end of the day, the happy hours, the jam sessions, the doghouse, the stuff that took place in Guitar 77 and beyond. And in a way, I saw this reciprocity that is so central to this group as, again, countering the kind of Singaporean story of values where people are afraid about not being in front or being left behind, or the meritocracy, as you mentioned, and the whole goal is prosperity and that kind of thing through development and capitalism. And here was a group of people that were saying, no, we can live another way. and find meaning in this other way of knowing the world. So those two things, the cosmopolitanism and the moral economy of reciprocity, I'm really glad to hear that those are there. We're there for you. The heritage is also something that I wanted people who read the book to walk away with. And again, Jane, in that wonderful summary, you picked up on it. Heritage studies generally define heritage as the past and the present. However, heritage has become a project, so to speak, and there are all kinds of heritage societies, and of course the governments have great interest in recognizing and identifying heritage within their sovereign borders for all kinds of reasons. Okay, so when I thought about heritage, I kind of came at it through the more conventional heritage studies and the things that you would find at a heritage society that classifies heritage into like tangible and intangible. That's the kind of general classificatory system, okay, of heritage. And so that didn't work for me. I couldn't easily, if at all, separate tangible from intangible heritage. An example. So, as you noted, Jane, in our rehearsals and in all of our gatherings and get-togethers, but especially when we were rehearsing for the various Stray Dog shows, the place where these guys grew up, Katong, haunted us at every move, you know. And so that's where I heard all the stories about growing up in Katong was during our rehearsals. And so there you go. So the tangible heritage here is the street and the trees and its location, this neighborhood within a city, okay. But the intangible stuff, the growing up there, the bonding, the experiences under the tree. By the way, here's Khiun's new album. Just came out a couple weeks ago. You can get it on CD too. This is the tree that I talk about in the book. It is now, the album name is Last Dog Standing. And so the tree is, at least for Khiun and them, tangible heritage, but it's all the stories and experiences that are the intangible stuff that you can't see anymore, right? But yet that's the most tangible aspect of this vernacular milieu, is the stories and the experiences and so rather than kind of think about heritage in the kind of heritage society sense, I began to think about it that way. And then when we got caught up into the national heritage projects, when we played the Esplanade as the Stray Dogs and so forth, and this provided really great opportunity for exploring this topic. I'll never forget, we were in the backstage waiting to go on, and the producers were so convinced that we were either getting drunk in our dressing room and that we wouldn't be able to perform the set list that we had presented. And they actually asked us to take some songs off the set list because they were convinced that we wouldn't be able to do it. You know, they kept walking into the dressing room to see if they could catch us drinking whiskey and stuff. And so, again, as Jane noted, we played that up, you know. It was, we adjusted to the situation, and of course we went out and killed the set and played every song, and we were the only, out of the three performers, the only one who actually did it on time. But anyway, you know, so those kinds of things. To answer the questions, the emotional attunement in terms of different ethnographic experiences, there was nothing like this. I mean, I've worked mostly in the field of medical anthropology. I work with people who are suffering from type 2 diabetes. And I didn't have diabetes. And so, you know, I've spent many years on that topic. I did research in the United States and in a kampung in Yogyakarta in Indonesia. My first book, Healing the Modern in a Central Javanese City, is about my ethnography of urban medicine, kind of surrounding diseases of modern living and lifestyle. So I never, you know, while I was friends and neighbors in the kampung where I lived, the people who I were talking to, doctors and nurses and clinicians and people suffering from diabetes and family members and so forth, we didn't become friends. Nor were the duties and obligations in our relationship at all the same. In this Singapore context, becoming a member of a band sets off the reciprocity that I was talking about. You got to show up. You got to fulfill your obligations. You got to practice and play the songs and exchange those sounds and soundings and fingerings and whatever it takes to get through the song. And if you don't fulfill those obligations, then you're done. So this is, you know, social relations that are meant to be established as enduring ones through reciprocal exchange. You do this for me, I'll do this for you. You keep doing it for me, and I'll keep doing it for you. So that really was very, very different and brought me into the relationships in deeper ways than any other research that I've done as an ethnographer and anthropologist. I think I hope I answered, or at least spoke to the politics problem with Latour. The non-materialized emotional investment, such as fandom, affinity, and tolerance. Well, I thought you picked up on the tolerance very well in the talk about mistakes. And that actually is a portion of the book that I wish I would have teased out a bit more. Fandom. Well, I blew that, didn't I? I mean, I know what the fans thought of us because but I didn't make any methodological attempt or have any methodological attention towards that category. Again, just like with the whole book, I wanted to pay attention to what was happening before me. You know, I'm interested in a world which is present at hand. I'm a phenomenologist, and I love the emergent, so. But I blew it on that one. Although I got to know, you know, many of the fans who came by the shop, came by the doghouse when we hung out at those tea dances. We organized 2 tea dances for the stray dogs, and met many fans that I had heard about within the community there. And generally, I think people were pleased that we were revitalizing this moment, this sound, this sonic history, you know, that Bart Barendrecht and Adil talk about. Adil, okay. The bubble of sorts. Yeah, well, you know, again, within this cosmopolitanism, distinction, there wasn't much talk about the differences in terms of who was present in the group, right? But I did hear a lot about Malaysia and I met a lot of Malay bands hanging out in the practice studios. They all came through. We all sat and talked after they rehearsed and everything. I think what I heard from Khiun and others was that things had been okay in Singapore until late 70s when, you know, Iranian Revolution or whatever, and you start to see the hijab and you know, halal food. That's one thing that the guys complained about, how they couldn't eat together anymore with their Malay friends. Couldn't eat the same food and things like that. We, as far as Malaysia for our performing and for our band and the community, these were opportunities to go have more fun than you could have in Singapore. So trying to get gigs in KL, we played in Malacca, and Ho Chi Minh also held the same thing. It was more fun. These were, especially for blues music, it was said, you know, I was told that, you know, the music would be appreciated more in Malaysia than it would be in Singapore. And so, you know, there was that kind of notion. So we tried to get gigs in Malaysia whenever we could. The one, you know, kind of obstacle to hanging out with the Malay bands generally was alcohol. After rehearsal in the jam studio, we would be drinking whiskey and they weren't. Didn't necessarily do anything to the conviviality of the situation, but it was there, you know. So, and then I'm going to end because I hear we need to get to the panel discussion. One thing that I'd hope come out of the book was the kind of care that takes place amongst the people in this, that participate in this small community. And that again was a kind of politics to me, that again, that you don't hear about that kind of care generally. You don't necessarily see it. But in this community, it is definitely an important feature of the social relations. And I thought that too, like cosmopolitanism, like the reciprocity, was a political statement saying there are other ways to live in this place. So I hope I answered your questions, and I'm here to answer any other questions that come my way. And thank you very much. And there they are. Okay.
Lovely gig. Now, so do we have any questions from the floor, from the audience? Oh, Nasri, good to see you. Steve, are you able to read the questions here?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, when we went to play the Esplanade, we had to submit all the lyrics to our songs and the set list to the National Arts Council. Others, you know, we avoided the state as much as possible. So we found ourselves a little tiny place in the basement of a mall where, you know, you're not supposed to drink and food and beverage, but we did it. So state intervention, only when we encountered the state at that Esplanade show, we tried to stay away from those guys as much as we could.
You know, Steve, I just want to add that the state doesn't stay away from you.
Oh.
So in 2014...
KK, you're muted.
Oh. No, I'm not.
I can hear him.
Can you hear me? Yeah,
I can hear you.
So Steve, I just want to add that the state doesn't stay away from you. Maybe you're not here in 2014. I did a kind of like rock festival on underground music as part of the Singapore Memory Project that was funded by the state. And one of the lineups included the Stray Dogs. So the state was there.
There you go.
But they didn't want to be seen.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, the state is now beginning to recognize that the 1960s has some value the swinging 60s. I mean, when I left, there was a stage performance at the Capitol Theater of a play, Tropicana, which was about a club and bar in Singapore that endured the crackdown of the state and the yellow culture campaigns. And here it was in the Capitol Theater. It was all a bunch of old. There were not many young people in the audience, but the play itself was a strong statement against the state for not quelching, stamping down creativity, everyday creativity of Singaporeans, and so I thought, oh, okay, somehow this got by. So somebody must be seeing some value in the 1960s at the moment for heritage reasons.
So do we have any other questions? I think we have one from, before that, Pui, right? So you mentioned that the band couldn't hang out drinking with Malay bands. How essential is alcohol to the music, Steve? I think you answered that question very well.
Yeah. I mean, alcohol was the fluid. I mean, well, I'm going to tell you. Okay, so but it's not. Don't. I got to tell this story because you're going to walk away with the wrong impression. When I arrived in Singapore, I was a sober alcoholic. I'd been sober for 7-8 years. I met Kiang and the boys, and they were all drinking. I was hanging out at the shop, but I wasn't. And they protected my sobriety no matter where we were. When we were in Ho Chi Minh playing and everyone wanted me to drink, when we were Malacca, all the rehearsals, all of those things. So while alcohol is essential feature of, especially for the men, but most in this small community, I haven't talked about this before, so I don't know, exactly what I'm trying to say, except perhaps to kind of take apart a little bit, that this is all about getting totally drunk and intoxicated, and it's a male thing, and that there's no kind of nuance to any of that. There is. Yeah.
Just to elaborate.
Sorry.
It feels to me, Steve, that it is very consistent with this point about tolerance that you raise around the cosmopolitan conviviality. Imagine that has to really only be about race, but of course it can be about any vector of difference, including sobriety and drinking. And it feels to me entirely consistent with that analytical lens that you had there, that your choices in that respect should be respected and even guarded.
That's what happened.
And maybe also just to comment a bit, and also like following up, right? I mean, it's wonderful that the question was raised as well, right? Because I mean, you are uncovering, I guess, indirectly these unseen fissures or ruptures in cultural differences that are occurring at different points of time, and maybe they're perceived differences. And of course, these are very sensitive topics, right? And I mean, let's not beat around the bush. I mean, as Jane says, like, there are instances of people that fall outside of these, generalizations about race and ethnicity as well. I mean, we have to acknowledge that there are officially Muslim or Malay people that probably partake in alcohol. Thereby, if you were writing, if you did observe them in your book, you would not be able to, out of ethical reasons, write about it, right? The same way that when we observe the history of popular culture in the Malay world, I've noticed pictures of glasses that could be Collins glasses, So I mean, and bottles here. You hear anecdotes. So, I mean, I think you've also uncovered a means through, I think also through the things that you've not said, right? To the unsaid things. We are now able then to, as Jane says, question this intersecting vectors of differences and sensitivities as well.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so there's a question from two questions. One from Gabriel. We thought that what thoughts do any of all you have about blending musical and critical theoretical language in an analytical piece? And another question from Go Bing Chen in Facebook. I am just curious about this, but what is your favorite part of the songwriting process? So, Steve, over to you.
Okay. You might have to read the first one. You might have to read the first one to me again, but I'll start with the songwriting process.
Okay.
So that's another thing about this book. For those of you who are interested, first of all, on the press's website, there's a link to all of the YouTubes that appear in the book, all of the performances, and you can read the book and click on them chronologically as you read if you want. But the songwriting, so that was another aspect of all of this, is that we started out playing blues classics. And as this became a project, I said, you know what, guys, there are some things happening in anthropology at the moment, multimodality, trying to figure out different ways to express ethnographic information, not only through text and not only through picture, but other ways, through a performance or through a musical composition, through theater. Victor Turner years ago thought that theater would be a great vehicle for expressing ethnographic information. And so we consciously began the songwriting process around trying to express everyday things that we experienced in our group, our everyday values that we used or experienced, and put them into musical compositions. And so the piece that you heard briefly, Shokla, I was in the shop one day and the clerk said, "Have you had breakfast yet?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why don't you go have a kaya toast set upstairs? It's Shokla." And so I hadn't had a kaya toast set, and I had it, and it was Shokla. And so I went back downstairs, and Kiang had finally shown up, and I said, I'm writing a song about Shokla. And so we started to think about it, and we wanted to mix blues, the cultural blending here. So we took blues music, 1-4-5 chords. We took the general kind of nuances in the blues music of kind of sex, and we turned a kaya toast set into a blues song about having sex. So that's kind of how the songwriting process went. What was the question before this?
The theoretical aspects of blending musical and academia, basically.
Yeah, well, Adil can speak to this as well. And Adil spoke to my efforts. I don't know if they were successful or not, to try and do this with notions of deep sound, sensibilia. Stephen Feld's doing this with acoustomology. At times, I have to admit, it felt kind of forced at times. Because I'm an academic, and I am interested in academic understandings. I mean, trying to find a way to blend that was difficult at times. And so what I decided to do was keep it light, as Jane said, or gentle, as she said. And that was my approach to it. I'm an ethnographer. I'm a storyteller. And I love description, and so that's where I wanted it to lay.
But if I may add just a little bit about this whole the intersection of music, of theory and music. I mean, I mean, I know if maybe if you're approaching it as a fan of the music and maybe somebody that's interested in history, it's like, why all this theoretical stuff? But I mean, it's essentially we're just trying to make sense or make meaning
Yes.
of these experiences that we have in the music and that the fans experience through music. And I find that it is really important actually to theorize the musical experiences and expressions that are coming out, because we're revealing things. Music has this ability to reveal social and cultural aspects that we don't see and that we don't hear. So I think one other aspect that we didn't mention aside from alcohol drinking is gender, right? Is the kind of profound, profound absence of women in the examples here. Of course, there were singers that were mentioned, and there are some people that were intersecting, but we're also looking at oftentimes men don't think about their socialization as a gendered thing, but it is very much a gender specific mode of interaction, especially when you have or single sex bands who are heterosexual, interacting in that space. So it allows you to think about this. Music actually brings these things out, like the songs that you're writing about are talking about a heterosexual male experience of eating kaya toast, and then relating it back,
That's
so
fantastic.
we do need the theory, because the theory does reveal the other aspects of music. It's probably why we love music so much as well. Not to be cheesy about it, but is those
That
other
was
meanings.
fantastic, Adil. That was fantastic.
And I think, speaking of which, just want to add in the other dimension about Steve's unique positionality that allows him to be embedded in with the stray dogs. Something that cannot just be done by any anthropologist or anyone who's interested. They need to understand Steve, and Steve knows them as well. It's the same generation, same issues. And that makes it a lot easier. Okay, we have one final question, from Roger Nelson, and so it's Flasher and Steve, if you can, anyone else in the panel can address them.
Yeah, that's a good question. There are quite a bit of a overlaps and exchanges and associations beyond just the musicking and the music community and other creative worlds. For this small group, it was mostly centered around musicking. But I think Khiun owned an art shop for many years, and there were all kinds of people that circulated through this group that weren't musicians but were involved in creative industries of other kinds. But again, that this was really focused on musicking.
I just want to add that the shop that they were operating in the basement of the mall, it has the creative and convergence for different kinds of trades and activities. And just going back very quickly, what the discussion about Khiung's talk about Islamization just reminded me, in Peninsula Plaza, when I was there in the 80s or even early 90s, there was a shop selling rock and metal music T-shirt merchandise, and they also had a portrait of Ayatollah Khomeini in there. So you see the messiness of it. And just to contextualize for people not familiar with Singapore, that Shiite Muslims are a minority in Singapore. So that was that space that was given to them in the same mall.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
No, that was a long time ago. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think the time is up, and I'm sure we had a very enjoyable and fruitful session. And with that, I'd like to thank the organization, NUS Press and Kital, and Steve, Jane, and Adil for this lovely session, and not forgetting our coordinator, Sana, too, who is at the background all the while. So thank you very much, everyone.
I wonder if I could just say one final thing.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I just want to read something from the last page of the book. This is a song that we wrote, so this is for the guy asked, or the person who asked about songwriting. And we rehearsed it, but we never performed it. It's called Can't Complain. Can't complain about this life. Can't explain this wild ride. It's luck, you say. I must admit I'm mystified. Take every chance that comes your way, 'cause you never know. Listen to what I say. Don't be scared, you made it through yesterday. It's luck, you say. I must admit I'm mystified. Take every chance that comes your way. Well, I met up with some boys down in Singapore, playing our guitars like never before. Rocking in the basement till our spirits soar. It's not over yet. It's not over till we say so. Thank you, everyone.
So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And before we go, we have an announcement to make. Sana, if you can flash out the discount from NUS Press for Sonic City. So with a code called Sonic25, you will have a 25% discount for purchasing this wonderful book. And Steve, I look forward to another volume in future. All right. So with that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And I can call a close to this wonderful session on a Friday afternoon, and in Canada, a Friday night.
Thank you very much.